Betty, you've been an artist since 1980, when you got your fine arts degree. How, in general, have you developed in the last 30 years, would you say?
Well, things have evolved rather than big changes in our style, starting on one way and then working into another. Things have evolved based on the same things that I was actually experimenting with in art school. I was studying for my art degree when photorealism was one of the big movements. And I was working with a museum at the school and had occasion to go to New York and visit a lot of the galleries and became quite familiar with photorealism. And it really attracted me, the idea of working with photos.
All right.
And I'm still working with photos. I didn't want to do photorealism the way people were doing it at the time. They were painting such exact paintings that it seemed like it was actually a photograph. But I wanted to work with the photograph as an object and then modify it in certain ways and play with it and develop sort of my own style of doing it.
Oh, I see. The photos really relate to a lot of family past and family traditions. Is that?
Yes, I decided I wanted to work with family album type photos for emotional reasons, and also because I find them very attractive. I find them to be an important part of our lives, and I also find that the photographs from my family album are the same photographs that are in everybody's family album. Even with the difference between the United States and Spain, they still have photographs of the same kinds of things. I found that it was something that people could identify with, even though they were my family photos and family photos of friends. People will save photos and send them to me and say, someday you might want to use this.
Yes, I can understand. Has there been a tradition of art in your family?
No. Actually, I'm the first person to work as an artist in the family. I had a lot of exposure to art as a child. My parents always took us to the Detroit Museum of Art. This was one of our favorite weekend excursions. And when I was in grade school, I was in special art classes, which the city organized for students that showed some talent in art. But my family, there was no one in my family who was an artist.
Betty, how did you come to Spain? What brought you to Spain?
Well, actually, I have a long history with Spain. I came to Spain as an exchange student when I was in high school and spent the summer here with a Spanish family, actually in the town right next to where I live now, in Sitges, and also in the city of Barcelona. And I loved it. I had a wonderful time, and I always dreamed about coming back. And for many years I kept up correspondence with Spain, but did not come back until 1980. And in 1980 I came back with my family and spent some time here, and then started coming back. I renewed some of my acquaintances here and started coming back. And I always had in the back of my mind the idea of living here. I really wanted to try it. And so in 1983, I had to make a choice about where I wanted to live, and I decided I'm going to go to Spain. I'm going to try it. And people asked, well, how long will you stay? And I said, well, as long as it works. And it's still working.
It's still working, yeah.
Barcelona is a great place to be.
Well, it's certainly a cultural centre. So
well, it is. It's cultural.
So do you think that has actually helped you in your art, or Catalonia's?
I don't see any change in my art from the fact that I'm living and working in Spain, in the sense that I'm not sure it would be that much different had I stayed in the States. But, you know, it's hard to tell. Certainly my subject matter is not particularly in the same way staying there. The nice thing about Barcelona, too, is the weather, the light. The light is wonderful for a painter, and also just for just flourishing as a human being. It's very attractive to me.
Oh, good. Talking about the influence of artists, or particular artists, or art movements, or any particular art professor, are there any, can you identify any of those that have particularly influenced you in your work, when you're learning? Or?
Yes, I think so. I don't think they're readily identifiable. I don't think they're that obvious to people. For example, one of the things that most influenced my work when I was starting my paintings in my studio was medieval art.
Oh.
And if you look at my paintings, I don't think immediately comes to mind medieval art. But I became fascinated with two things about medieval art. And one of them was the backgrounds of the tableaus and the religious art. Very often the background would be a textured gold. It would have like a pattern design with texture. It was done with relief. And I liked that. I liked the fact that there was this pattern background behind the figures. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing about early medieval art was that there was no modeling, there was no sense of three dimension in the figures. The faces could be fairly realistic, but the figures were sort of no body, just flat, and very often painted with patterns, very elaborate patterns on the clothing, and they often seem to be floating in this pattern background. And I think knowing that and looking at my paintings, you can see how I arrived at some of my technique using this a similar idea, but transformed into something contemporary. And one of the other things that influenced me contemporary art movement was pattern painting. For some reason, I became very fascinated with pattern painting, and in the 1980s, there were lots of artists working in the United States who basically painted patterns. There were no photographs or figures. It was just the idea, the colors and the repetition of patterns. And I also have a great affection for Matisse. And again, I think it was his use of color and his use of pattern. He also used a lot of patterns on the wall, patterns on the clothing of his figures in his paintings. And a painter who perhaps is not as well known is Vilanova, the French painter. Mm-hmm. And he painted these little tiny domestic scenes of daily life, which I guess appealed to me too, because my photographs are basically photographs from daily life. And also he did a lot of patterns on the clothing and on the walls, the wallpaper, the oriental rugs on the floor. So it seemed to have an attraction for that.